Running out of time. Every 15 minutes another woman will be beaten, raped, or murdered in the United States. Here are a few real stories of women who ran out of time. By the time it takes to read these words, a woman would have been beaten by her spouse. Here's one story. Lee was divorced and had a young son. She liked being married and was hoping to meet someone who wanted a family. She eventually meets Larry, who is handsome, charming, and likes children. Lee worked hard at being a loving mother and wife, but times were tough, so she went to work. Larry didn't like her working and questioned her every time she came home. Larry became very controlling over her entire life. After an argument, Larry punched her in the face. She had 2 black eyes and a broken nose. Of course, he apologized and promised it would never happen again. Months later, while arguing, Larry pushed Lee to the ground and kicked her several times. This time Larry cried, saying he loved her so much and it would never happen again. She loved Larry. She thought she could help him. The final time he beat her, he put her in the hospital with a broken arm and ruptured spleen. She wanted to leave, but how could she do this with a small child? A social worker stepped in and offered to help her. Lee never went back home. She moved into a shelter where she had time to weigh her options. She filed for divorce and moved back in with her family. She always thought love was enough to help them both, but she found out that people have to help themselves. By the time it's taken to read these next words, a woman would have been killed by her husband. Here's one story. Over their 10 years of time together, Misty had been abused by her husband, Kenny. Their separation only seemed to make things worse. According to her boss, Misty came to work one day and asked how her face looked. Her face looked like it had mascara smeared over it, but it turned out to be the whole side of her face was bruised because her husband had shut her head in the door. Misty filed for divorce. She would later tell her boss, "Thank you for being such a good friend, but I don't think I'll see you again." Her boss said, "If you're so serious about this abuse, maybe you ought to get a gun." Misty said no, she had a child and she was afraid of guns. 2 days later, Kenny broke into the house, shot and killed Misty, a family friend, and her sister. Each year, approximately 1,500 women are killed by their husbands or boyfriends. By the time it takes to read these words, a woman will be in fear for her life. She will defend herself and kill her husband. Here's one story. Joe and Sharon had gotten married out of high school back in the 1960s. He went into the military and she stayed home to raise their children. A career in the military was difficult with moving and little money. Joe was a demanding guy. Sharon felt it was easier just to do what he demanded instead of arguing about it. He had to retire because of his health and was miserable. He had no desire to make the best of it. But Joe did find time to berate Sharon constantly by calling her names like stupid, "You're dumb," and "You're just so fat." But there was a secret that Sharon never told anyone, that Joe had been physically and emotionally abusing her for years when no one was around. He had been in the military and he knew how to hit her to where no one could see her bruises. Later on, he started to threaten her with his weapon he had in the house, and she never told anyone. One day, Sharon called 911, telling them that she had just shot her husband of 30 years. Sharon was charged with murder in the second degree and assault in the first degree. She was found guilty because she never told anyone about the abuse. So she couldn't prove her reason for killing her husband was in self-defense. She was given 25 years in prison. She appealed her case and asked the governor's office to commute her sentence, explaining that she was a true victim of spousal abuse and that her life had been threatened and she only defended herself. Over time, Sharon learned to forgive herself and worked with other women in prison. She wanted them to know that they have options to get help, to get out, and to speak up when you're being abused. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, during the time of 1998 to 2002, there were almost 3.5 million violent crimes committed against family members. 49% of these crimes were against a spouse. 84% of spousal abuse were against females, and 86% of victims of date partner abuse were females. 50% of the offenders in state prison for spousal abuse have killed their victims. 81% of the women are more likely to be killed than men during a domestic abuse event. Gender violence contributes to a wide range of social problems and include youth violence, medical and emotional issues, homelessness, divorce, alcoholism, drug abuse, poverty, transmission of STIs, and early death. Men who care about these issues need to educate themselves about the relationship between gender violence and these issues, then integrate them with this understanding in their work and daily lives. Education is key to help women and men understand what their options are when it comes to domestic violence and assault. Learn new skills. Learn how to cope with your anger. To understand violence, you have to know that it's a learned behavior in our culture through media, through previous experiences, watching another family member commit violence against their spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend. Your behavior can change, but you have to be aware of it. Domestic violence and assaults hurt everyone in time.